Welcome to Warblog. Today I'm going to play the Battle of Baghuz Fawqani for the second time. I did an original video of this, but there were so many sort of errors in it. Basically because I'd not configured the refugees, which play a key part in this. I'm not going to go through the basic intro because I think the other one will give some sort of grounding on that. But basically, this is sort of like ISIS's. I use the ISIL units in here because we call them ISIL. Their last stand, and it's been going quite slowly. And I think the key thing was the fact that they've got all these refugees. So the key thing about this, and the way I designed it, and it completely failed in the first video, not for any particular reason other than the fact that when I put the refugees in, I've got to put these little sort of bits in that are specific to refugees, and it's very easy to not do that. It's not automated, and because I use it so infrequently, I keep messing them up or forgetting to do it. I've got to put a little sort of an array in. It's quite a manual process, and if you mess it up, it sort of doesn't work. So essentially, the way the refugees are being played in this, I mean, other than the obvious, is that ISIS, that they either go to the refugee camp down here, which is this. This is all sort of like a refugee camp, which is where ISIS is based at the moment, sort of surrounded in there. Apparently they've got tunnels and things. Or ISIS can use them sort of as human shields. No clear evidence that they're doing that, but I think they are. I think the suggestions are that they are. Essentially, the SDF advance has been slowed because of the intermingling of refugees, but the SDF player, what they can do is they can say, okay, well, I'm holding before I turn, and they quite have to hold for quite a few turns. So this will be a very long game, to be quite honest, and very fiddly and probably quite boring in that sense. But if they say, well, this is a holding turn, so you can see there's a corridor there. So the refugees can then start moving towards that corridor. Now, for that one to get there, take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's pretty difficult. But in theory, you could hold for 8 turns, and in those 8 turns, you can't attack anyone. You've got to sort of that. I'm using this as a sort of almost a role play approach. But if you start then, because what the SDF are doing, they're having some. They're engaging in some sort of intense combat and airstrikes with air support on particular locations, and then they're pausing for the refugees to move to a place of safety, so to speak. And then once they've done that, then they're commencing their assault again. And this is one of the reasons why this period is taking so long. Now, I haven't read too much into it. But I think that's sort of the impression I'm getting. So I built this up with a big focus on the number of refugees. So first thing I'm going to do is take this town with this village. So we've got some refugees clearly building up there. So I can't go into that hex now. Now next turn I can say, okay, well, we're going to have a grace period. And then refugees can then, when the ISIS player moves, they've got to start move towards the north edge of the board. They've all got to start moving. But once that grace period is over, they've got to move towards the camp down here. During the grace period, ISIL can do what they want, so they can attack. They can't move off the board. So I think it's interesting, really, is sort of to see how the number of refugees will affect things. Now I'm just going to move this guy here. So again, we've got a lot more refugees there. I'm going to attack that unit because I just want to move him out of the way. So we've got massive amounts of refugees here now. too many really. So you can see this sort of massive, like, pile of refugees sort of just building up. So I can't attack into any of these hexes now. I can't attack any further that way. Got a problem there because there's a ISIL unit in there. Well, we only have two, so I don't need too much to that. So we've got more refugees now. Okay, let's see whether we can bombard this artillery. .2. It's going to be worth not a lot, but he's still there. Hasn't done a morale check yet. So look, so this is in there. This is in there. Okay. I'm not going to do much more. I don't want to do too much heavy thinking. I don't want to use my air power just yet. So, and I'm not going to play this for very long. So we're getting to this sort of point that I tried to make last time, in that there's just this overwhelming mass of refugees now that are bogging down the advance, so we can't advance through there. Now, because we've not announced a lull, there's only so much that can be done. Now, this unit is going to stay there, because moving that way, we're moving more towards the enemy, but these units are going to move off. However, I've also actually introduced the other rule, in that ISIL can use these units for their own defence. So let's put some refugees in there. A bunch in there, let's put some there. We'll leave those there. Got these insurgent units that are now actually working in the previous one. Okay, I'm going to attack these. And now I can get a 2-to-1 on this because they'll be worth, no effect, no effect. They'll be worth 4 and I'll be worth 10, so it'll be a 2-to-1. Is that going to be better than an attrition? I think I'm going to go for a 2-to-1 on that. Exchange. Not perfect, but we're still sat in there, and they've got 1 now. Some artillery here. So let's push that. Now there's too many in there to attack, but we can do an attrition. Which was unsuccessful. Do an attrition here. .6 damage. Do a 2-to-1 there, I think I will. 1-to-1 in exchange. 1-to-1 because I was down on the depressions. Okay. So we're going to move back into. I'm doing this a bit quick because I've already spent an hour on that other aborted video. I had done too much time. So what we've got now is this situation where there's so many of these refugees that it's now quite difficult. There's almost an entire wall along here because there's some in there, there's some in there, and there's an entire wall. We just can't go through that. You know, we haven't moved anything in there, but there's a continuation of them along there. You know, we could possibly move in there. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a safe zone. And in that safe zone, I'm going to do this. So we've got a safe corridor there. Safe corridor there. So the idea is I can't do any attacks. I'm going to pile a few things up for defence. Okay, so we've got these now safe corridors. So that gives ISIL a chance to do things, but the refugees, and let's do them first. We'll say you have to do them first because these are sort of optional rules, just ways to sort of approach this. So this is why it's taken so long. So now they've got to sit there while these refugees get their stuff together. Now ISIL can't do this. You know, there's a lot of sort of, none of this is in the mechanics of the game. Now they can't, I'm going to assume that they can't do anything because there's a zone of control here. Now again, that might not be quite how we should play it, but that's how I'm sort of doing it. Yeah, let's just do it. Oops, you shouldn't have done that. We can't go through the minefield. Okay, so all these refugees can go through the obstacles, basically trying to flee. That's all they can do. Right, so now ISIS can take advantage of this, and we can't have them advancing, but So that's a sort of weak stack. But move him. Let's alternate against this first. Okay, now we're at 6, so we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. Still not good odds. Oh, okay, we can get there. So some insurgents against this motorized unit. Succeeded. So he's now down to 3. So that was a car bomb of some sort. Got another one there. See if we can get him in there. And there was another one that succeeded. Usually they fail. So now he's worth depression 6. Got another one here. Succeeded. Okay. Well, we've got an option now. You see, because they're now he's worth 4 and he's worth like 0.2. So it's 4.2, so less than 5. So we should get 20. We should be about 4 or 5 to 1. So 1 to 1. I don't know how that worked. Presume because they're total before depression as such. But we destroyed a unit, which is actually unprecedented. Now, the thing that I'm sort of getting to there, I'm sort of miscalculated there, and never really, it was always a bit vague in my mind's eye, but they play, you know, as we imagine they should. Well, what I can't remember what I was saying now, but basically the point is, because the SDF have got this sort of clear zone for the refugees to come out, it leaves them a little more open to ISIS carrying out these counterattacks, because they're going to have to sit there for another turn. And, for example, we've got some insurgents here. Oh no. It's just loading now. Let's go against one of them. See, they all that failed on the last one. They all won. We've only got one unit, so it's no good. Well, they probably recovered. Nope. Let's try it on this one. Ooh. And let's see what we can do here. 2-to-1 DR. So ISIS have actually really done quite well. Not cool. The chance of those previous insurgent units working was actually quite low, and they all worked. So he's down at 3. So we've got another. So this could be a 2-to-1. Look at that. ISIS have really pounded. I mean, they've really pushed these units back, and there was a report as recently of 2 ISIS counterattacks, and we could almost assume that those were them. I'm going to leave it at that. Not the whole game. I'm going to keep this one short, but that turn, because I want to get onto the next turn. So essentially, they're on this. The SDF are on this sort of open valley sort of thing. Well, he's going to move. He's going to try and move to the edge of the board there. Oh no, it's because it's the Syrian Democratic turn. So the Syrian Democratic player is not going to do anything. So that's why I won't move, because it's the SDF player. Because they're not going to move anything unless they could, because they, you know, they're everything's a safe zone. We'll move these guys out of the way so these can get up, and that's it. Now I'm being a bit sort of open on how that sort of all works, because we could possibly move him in as a more defensive, but I just want to keep it quick as well. So we're now back onto the ISIS player's turn. So we've got this big stack here basically. So what we can do now, obviously that's not brilliant, but we can do it in 2 turns. It's overlapping. I'll have to sort that out as well. I wonder what happened there. Yeah, I don't know what happened. So we've moved some refugees off the map, and these guys are going to move. He's not going to go. Now they can't go through the minefield, so they're all stuck. But because they've got this sort of proposed option, they're going to stay there. I could start moving them this way. In fact, I'm going to move. Well, the ISIS don't want them doing that. They're going to bundle them over there. Oops. Yeah. So ISIS are continuing to deploy them as a human shield. And these guys are going to try and move up here. So I'm going to leave it at that, but the point I'm trying to get to here is that you've got this sort of alternating period of, you know, trying to facilitate the movement of refugees off the table. And we could say that they couldn't go through ISIL units, but you know, you can make up your own rules, or you can, you know, use it as you like. And then after that, after these units have gone off the board, we're going to push, you know, with strength against the next level of positions, which in its own right will then produce more refugees, because each one of these towns has some refugees in them, and etc., etc. And I think it's quite an interesting situation, really, because an interesting game in that it gives a perspective on that issue. And I'm not sure how accurate that is, but I think that that's when I looked at it, I thought, well, this isn't just going to be a battle, because it's not actually a battle. This is like the last enclave. It's been a bit frustrating, really. I mean, maybe that's not the best word. But this last Hajan pocket, it seems to be going on forever, and they're always the last battle. This is, and then all they seem to have is like 3 or 4 fields. I mean, how can ISIS still exist in just 3 or 4 fields? I mean, what have they got? It's like when you look at the map, there's not even any buildings. They don't even have any towns. And how can they still be sort of, a force resisting, massive air power from the United States and, their Syrian Democratic Forces? I mean, how are they still there? But I think that when you look at this and you play it through, you can sort of see, well, one of the reasons it might be like that is because of the refugees sort of getting in the way, so to speak. And as a game, you probably wouldn't want to sort of go through the process of walking these refugees off off the board, for the whole game. But alternatively, you could sort of see, how far back you can push, or you could just attack with the refugees in stacks. But I mean, the point is, it's part of the issue, and I think that's one of the reasons it's taking so long, because they're intermingled. I mean, it's describing this as a refugee camp, so it's sort of, well, how can they be hiding in the refugee camp? And apparently they've got tunnels, and it all sort of sounds a bit odd, really. But I think this sort of scenario will help put some of it into perspective, because I don't think there's too much that's stopping the SDF from winning the battles, from taking the hexes. I mean, they can take that one next, they can take that one next, but they can't advance and have the refugees walking off in safe corridors at the same time. And the ISIL player, as we've seen in this situation here and in these 2 situations here, can counter-attack, especially if you leave your units, because they've got, and the longer it takes, and I think this is, if somehow you could really sort of expedite the time it's going to take to sort of get these refugees off, you could play it a little better, because these units, for example, you can see they're used 5, so they've got 5 more turns to wait until they can be used again. But it can take 5 turns, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 for these refugees to get off. In which case, these insurgents who do the car bombs and things like that are active again. And as the ISIL player, you can use those strategically, as we did over here, by just completely bombing this unit until it was worthless, and then attacking it and eliminating it. They can actually, they do have a sting in their sort of, their death throes, so to speak. And as we saw, I mean, I haven't got the reference, the South Front reference, but they did 2 fairly significant and major assaults, and their assaults all happen at night, and so they just look like fireworks. But it was quite interesting, really, and it seems that I think they lost 112 people. And they've got the effort, the inclination to sort of do those sorts of things, but the SDF have so much air support. They flew 55 air sorties with all these aircraft. That's why I've got them there. And you can start, they don't really stand a chance. So it's interesting to sort of put that into perspective and see how that sort of works with the reported dialogue, so to speak. And I'm going to keep it short there. So there's actually 30 seconds there. So the other video is sort of the issue with it was the refugees are sort of not configured properly, so they weren't appearing. But hopefully I give you an idea of what's sort of happening there, and this issue. Or I mean, it's it's timeless as an issue, and I don't like to always, I'm not playing for realism. I don't put them in there when there's a significant element. But in all wars, even from the Napoleonics and before, the refugees were sort of like a big part of the problem, so to speak, or the problem with waging war. I think before the Napoleonics, or not so much consistently. I mean, obviously cities were looted and sacked, throughout time, but I think there was a general consensus just from the top of my head that officers and leaders would engage the enemy outside of built-up places, to respect the places, also not to raise them and not to destroy as many houses. So they would meet in the field somewhere. Maybe this is sort of going back much earlier to sort of the more feudal times of War of the Roses, for example. But I think that there've always been problems with people fleeing war zones, and I think it's so much more pronounced these days. There's 20,000 of these people, and there are other scenarios where there are a lot of refugees. But I don't think I want to get bogged down into sort of creating every game that sort of has that as a human issue, because I don't really think that it's so important to contain. What I mean, because you can get so emotive and sort of it can be so sort of difficult to portray those sorts of things. But I think in this one, it's significant for that purpose. And but I mean, 20,000 displaced people is quite a lot. And I mean, the logistics of war is in its own right, massively complex. And I read quite a lot on the logistics, and I sometimes will want to put that in, but it just seems too fiddly to really bother with. Especially when you consider that for any given battle, you're probably going to have all the, all the logistics and supply that you need. And if people don't have supply, you can just make them weaker, give them smaller strength units, etc., etc. But in these situations, it can be, quite significant, really. I mean, I think in World War II there was sort of massive, caravans of refugees sort of pouring across Europe in one direction or another. And to some extent, it's a burden on whoever's receiving them, because they're impinging on their supply lines, they're blocking roads. I'm not trying to say they're just an inconvenience, but they've suddenly got to take care of all these people. So to some extent, they want to advance protecting their homes so they can go back, because otherwise they just form huge refugee camps and everyone dies of disease, so etc., etc. But I mean, I think when you're looking at war, you've got to sort of have an open mind for how all that works, and when those sorts of situations are key, in portraying them, you can learn quite a lot from those sorts of examples. But I think the point is, I'm trying to get to is, especially the Syrian war and all wars, every situation would have refugees, and it's just not worth having, sort of conveying that time and time again. But anyway, so I'll leave it at that. If you want to give it a go, sign up, and it should all be sort of working a little better, and you can see how you fare, and etc., etc. And I'll speak to you later. Cheerio.